Hello everyone, and welcome to the final part of this session on wise well-being practices. In this final session, we'll focus specifically on ideas and guidelines for you to use to choose wise well-being practices. I want to begin with just a quick reminder of the three essentials, something to keep in mind whenever we're choosing well-being practices. Small steps, step back, and step together. Small steps means we don't have to make big changes. We just need to choose practices that will work, that will fit into our daily schedule, and that we will want to do. 5 or 10-minute practices are great. Step back means that from time to time, one of the wisest well-being practices we can engage in is just to gain perspective on our lives, to notice what is going well and build on that and be thankful for it, and to acknowledge what is challenging and address those challenges when we can. And step together means that whenever possible, we need to journey along with somebody else toward flourishing, nurturing ecosystems of well-being whenever we can. I'm going to share 5 wise well-being practices that you could begin with that will also help guide you towards other well-being practices. And the first wise well-being practice is simply to know your well-being. It may not be helpful to adopt something that somebody recommends or that you read about in a book or on the internet. What we need to focus on is well-being practices that will address our areas of need. So whether you use the assessment on our app or another well-developed well-being assessment, start by acknowledging where you're good and where you're not so good in terms of your well-being profile. Ideally, you'll use a measure that you can use over time, so you can track changes in your well-being. And as I've mentioned, our app is available free to all of you. Second is to choose wisely. A minute ago, I Googled how to improve daily well-being, how to improve happiness, and I got millions of responses. And the top ones were 63 simple things that we could do to improve our well-being, or 5 easy ways to improve your happiness. And while some of those may in fact be wise well-being practices, many of them are not. So choose wisely. And to help you, by choosing wisely, we mean choose evidence-based practices that fit your preferences and fit your lifestyle. And to help you choose wisely, we're introducing what we're calling wise well-being strategies. Think of these as 8 groupings of wise well-being practices. There are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of well-being practices that we think you could fit into these 8 different groupings. We're calling them strategies. Once you know your well-being, you can select a strategy that will help you address that well-being need, and then find, or in some cases, create your own wise well-being practice. Let me give you an example. Tranquil strategy is where mindfulness and meditation practices are. Meditation and mindfulness work by calming our thinking and calming our emotions. There are other practices that work through the tranquil strategy. In the last session, we talked about 4: centering prayer, Lectio Divina, the prayer of examine, walking the prayer labyrinth. But you may be able to find practices that work through the tranquil strategy of your own. For me, hiking, sometimes even walking, is a tranquil strategy. As I mentioned, I don't find sitting and trying to quiet my mind very helpful. But if I can go out on a trail or even take a walk, especially in a park or a garden, it does calm my thinking and it does calm my emotions. And so it turns out that walking and hiking are wise well-being practices for me that work through the tranquil strategy. This next slide seems to have a lot of information. It's something that's brand new from our research team. But if I explain it, I hope that you'll find that it could be helpful to you. Arrayed around the well-being model are the 8 strategies, and they're placed close to the different dimensions of well-being that those strategies are most helpful for boosting or sustaining. For example, practices that work through the joyful strategy are particularly helpful for boosting our daily well-being. And you can see 3 descriptions of the kinds of practices that work through the joyful strategy. Those that boost our sense of hope and optimism, those that help us to think positively about things in our lives, and those that foster positive emotions. So if you need to boost your daily well-being, joyful practices would be particularly helpful. But because the tranquil practices between daily well-being and resilience, that indicates that practices that work through the tranquil strategy will be particularly helpful for both of those areas. So you could choose a tranquil practice to boost your daily well-being. Likewise, you might choose an engaged practice that will help boost both daily well-being and authenticity. So if daily well-being is an area that you want to focus on, practices that work through either the tranquil strategy, the joyful strategy, or the engaged strategy will all be helpful for you. We'll make sure that you have copies of all of my slides, particularly this one, so that you can use this as a guide for choosing the kinds of well-being practices that address your specific well-being needs and goals. Thirdly, a wise well-being practice for almost all of us is to avoid too much media. It is very true that our exposure to social media and to news media can challenge our daily well-being. During the early stages of the coronavirus, I found myself getting more and more anxious as I saw news headlines, and they would use such hyperbolic terms that I found myself unable to stop worrying. So I took, as many people call it, a news Sabbath. I simply did not check news media. I wanted to know what was going on, so I selected the Centers for Disease Control to know about big changes in the coronavirus, and I selected one local news source so I could know more about what was happening in my home community. For many of us, we can get caught up in checking Twitter or Instagram or YouTube, and so limiting our exposure to social media and news media is probably a wise well-being practice for many of us. Fourth, and this may seem simple, but it's so vitally important, and this is to build in more breaks throughout the course of our day. Many of us work straight through from the time we begin work until the time that we end, without taking any meaningful break throughout the course of the day. We've known for many years that daily relaxation and detachment is important. Ending your day with something that relaxes your body and that gets your mind off of the daily activities and more onto something positive is really important. Relaxation is releasing the physical tension from your body. Detachment is detaching from the things that occupied you during the day, whether they were good or challenging. But we also now know that micro breaks are important. Taking time every 2 or 3 hours to take a quick nap, or to take a gentle walk, or to do a centering prayer or some sort of tranquil practice. We really do need every couple of hours some mental, spiritual break from our activities. Again, whether they're challenging or not. I oftentimes have to set an alarm, a reminder, particularly on the days that I'm engaged in something difficult or challenging. My tendency is to grind through 3 or 4, maybe more hours without a break. I need to stop. This is a simple practice that can improve your daily well-being immensely when you engage in it regularly. So when we talk about take 5 for flourishing, taking 5 minutes at a few points throughout the day to engage in a tranquil or a joyful practice can be a real boon, especially to those of us that find our days challenging and difficult. And then lastly, just to encourage you to end particularly your work day on what we call a high note. Particularly on those days where the work has been more challenging, maybe a break at noon where you were able to enjoy yourself and eat some good food. But one of the things that can turn this day from an otherwise difficult one into a really positive one is to simply finish your workday doing a high note activity. By a high note activity, I mean something that you feel you can perform well and that you really enjoy or find meaningful. So for me, one of my high note activities is reading a research article. So I keep a list of the articles that I really look forward to reading, and I can end my day reading one of those articles. I'm a scientist. I feel like I can understand the articles, and I really enjoy it, particularly when it leads me to some new insight that I can share with others. I also like to end my day tidying up my desk. There's something to me really satisfying about straightening my desk, organizing things before I leave, whether I'm here in my home or in my office. So even simple things can be a high-note activity. So rather than rushing out the door at the end of a busy day or finishing with something that was really difficult, find a small 5-minute activity like tidying your desk or some other high note just to end your day well. Well, thank you for listening to these sessions. It must be really difficult to just watch somebody on a video and not have an opportunity to talk with others, but I'm grateful for your time and attention. And I just want to remind you that no matter where you are in your journey towards flourishing, there's always a small step that you can take. And we hope that at Flourishing in Ministry, we can assist you in taking that next step. Thank you again, and I wish you well.